Hi. So my next question and my last question actually is about the way that women are, I don't want to say treated, but portrayed in the Muslim religion and how that works out. I know in many countries, women have no rights at all. But of course, here in the United States, everybody has rights, I guess. And
At least on paper.
yeah, and so women, I don't know how that plays out in the Muslim religion here in America.
Yeah. So I think that the women question is always an interesting one. Usually I actually avoid it in the sense that I ask my wife to answer because I just think that it makes more sense that way. But since she's not here, there's kind of two ways, a process to look at this from, which is what are the actual teachings of Islam on this and what do Muslims do? We always have to kind of distinguish between these two. The society that the Prophet Muhammad was sent to was a tribal Arab society that in many ways was like all societies 1400 years ago. Not all, I think there's a few exceptions, but the vast majority of societies 1400 years ago didn't give women a whole lot of rights. And the teachings of Islam initially in those early periods affirmed a number of rights for women that didn't exist or were kind of in the gray area for that society at that time. So for example, economic rights of inheritance, of property ownership, of ability to engage in financial transactions. All of this stuff didn't exist in, people sometimes have spotty history. All of these things didn't exist in Europe until hundreds of years later. And so those things were there economically. Socially, women were part of the prophetic community. They engaged in social life. They were in the marketplaces. They were at the prayer spaces. They were involved in discussions that have to do with the community and so on. Education was a part of the early community as well, for men and for women. The prophetic tradition is that seeking knowledge is required for every believer, and this applies equally to men and women. So that wasn't an issue historic in that period. Political rights, women had political rights. They could, be engaged in the political process. I would say vote, but they didn't have really voting at that time, but they were in part of it. And so this was there in the early teachings. However, what you see is that you have a people who were traditionally oppressed, which would be women in this case, were given certain rights, and those rights were backed up by a prophet and revelation in many cases. But the people after the death of the prophet didn't always tend to follow those same patterns. And these are the same problems that you see up to today in many, or in some, I should say, Muslim majority areas. So some Muslim majority areas, or even minority settings depending on the culture in the place, but it's usually a cultural issue. So women not being a part of public life is a cultural issue. Women not driving is a cultural issue. Women not speaking or getting educated or any of these type of things these are all cultural issues. So one of the benefits that we have actually in the U.S. of being a very diverse Muslim community is that we have to do a lot. Being a very diverse Muslim community, I should say, under a lot of pressure, it requires us to do a lot of soul searching. We really have to. Islam. We don't just come to the U.S. and practice Islam as it's practiced in North Pakistan or Central Asia or the Maldives or somewhere, right? We have to say, of all of these competing interests and ideas, what is culture? What is Islam? How does that get impacted here in America? So what you see generally in America is at least a trend, and in many cases, especially in major institutions, a major presence of women in the communities themselves. Like I said, my wife is a public speaker that's much more popular than I am when it comes to her presence and how much she travels and how much she speaks and people who want to hear from her and so on. The mosque that I was part of here, the Islamic Center of Irvine, when I was here, had a female board president. We had women on the board of the mosque, women involved in all levels of engagement of the community. And so this is something, especially in the U.S., you see. Thankfully, we don't have this problem as much here. I don't want to say that we don't have it at all. Sometimes you have small pocket communities here and there who still have these issues. But I would say the mainstream kind of general trajectory of Islam in America is not such that it's like that. It's usually accepting of women, and we're of course negotiating these things, but we're trying to get it closer to the original prophetic teachings rather than cultural inheritances that came afterwards.
So a friend of mine went to a mosque with a bunch of other women. They take trips all the time. Sometimes they go and investigate water or something, and where that comes from in San Diego. And well, not really where that comes from, but anyway, they went to a mosque, and they were stunned to find out that women had to sit apart. And I think that just about did them in at that point. And so, if you could address that issue.
Well, I mean, there's so many different ways to come at this, but I'll start here. Is that in the Prophet's mosque, women didn't sit in a separate area, so to speak. There was one hall, and during prayer times, men would pray in the front and women would pray in the back. This is how we pray. Prayer is not something we usually kind of ask all the wisdoms behind. We just look at it as something that's, it's a divine guidance, so to speak. But does that mean, for example, like here in this mosque, we have an upstairs prayer area, and we have a main prayer hall. And women they have a choice. They can go upstairs if they want. They can come downstairs if they want. And the majority of them actually usually go upstairs, except for during lecture times. So if I was having a lecture, for example, in the main hall, usually what we would do is split the hall side to side rather than front to back. And so women would be there and be part of that too. So it's not, every place is different. There's an interesting project that started a little while ago by someone that we know in the Midwest area, I think, if I'm not wrong. She started this project called Side Entrance, and what she was doing was calling on people in different places around the country and the world to send pictures of women's prayer areas in mosques to kind of highlight sometimes the inequalities in that regard, which I think was a good project.
Yeah.
Sometimes people get upset, but it has to be fixed. And so I'm very grateful that I was here in this Islamic center where we had that kind of
moving toward equality. It sounds
moving
like.
towards
and I
better
think,
representation.
And I get the feeling that you talk about the early days, and I get the feeling that you yourself would like to really go back to that time where it was, I don't know, more equal, I guess I would say. The equality was there.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to, in everything, I would like to be closer to the Prophet's teachings. But, we can't go back in time. But we can go to the principle. We can go forward. And it's been a great honor for me to try to do whatever I can to support my wife's work and to really make sure that she's out there as someone who has a voice in the larger, Muslim community in America and kind of can speak on these things and address issues and on more than that. It's not like she's a woman, she only has to talk about women's issues.
Right.
She can talk about anything. So
that's great. I'd like to interview her. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Yes.